A lot of people today don't record their own drums, but if you do, you are either in two camps. You've been doing it a long time, you know how hard it is to get drum sounds, and you just do all the little things to make the drum sound great, or you just had to do something quick, so you just recorded it, and maybe you knew or didn't know what to do, and now you got drum sounds, and you're trying to mix it all together and make it sound good. Could be a live recording you did, maybe your band played somewhere live and you mic'd everything up, and now you got 4 drum mics, you're trying to make them sound as good as possible. Let me show you a good trick, all right? Tom Lord Alge style. That's really where I got this from. It's something I picked up from him. He basically talked about trigger tracks, like not using, everybody knows you could use samples and blend it in. That's not really what I'm talking about. Tom Lord Alge has a special way of making drums sound great when they don't come to him that way. He'll take a track, we'll call it snare trigger, all right? And that snare trigger, basically you put something on it like trigger 2 or any kind of, this is made by Slate. And this is a great plugin for samples, but you'll put this on it. And what you want to do is feed this into a send. So your send, for example, right here is, I have it labeled as this crazy thing, Dear Humanity M6, and a bunch of other nonsense. I open up a gate on the snare track itself now. So in other words, first thing you do is duplicate your snare track. Second thing you do is on that one of them, you put trigger, some kind of sample thing. Trigger 2 works. I also have a little bit of a reverb on it, but that's really it. And then I'm sending that into a send that's called Dear Humanity M6. You call it whatever you want. Call it Aardvark Bus, whatever. But you open a gate on the other track. So like I told you, started with a duplicate. So on the other track, you're opening up any gate. And you want to set the key input to that same thing. So up here, I got Dear Humanity M6 is my key input. Now, all you want out of the real track is, and this, granted, this is what I'm saying. If you have good drum sounds, you don't really need to do this as much. So what a big problem, common thing is cymbals will be bleeding all over the place if you don't place your snare drum mic correctly. And even if you do, if the drummer is a basher and he plays like a hammer on his cymbals, there's going to be a ton of white noise over the snare, and it'll be very hard to separate those. And when you try to mix it, you'll wind up trying to bring the snare up, and you'll bring up all these cymbals, especially if you use compression on the snare and things like that. So the goal here is to create a gated track that's really short, just like plip, 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 just the front of it. That's really what you're trying to get. And you gate the rest. Then you actually bring it back by using things like the SPL Transient Designer. So let me play you what it sounds like, just so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. I have the snare soloed, all right? But here, let me take off the solos first, just so you could hear it, and then then I'll put it back on. So check it out. Take what you came with. We're making good time. Sometimes you can't complain. Today's another day. Sometimes you slip away. Sometimes you slip away. Sometimes you can't complain. Today's another day. Sometimes you slip away. Sometimes you slip away. Now that snare cuts through. This is only 4 mics on the drums, and it was recorded using a particularly terrible interface. The thing was like old, and it's an MBox 2 Pro interface with, notoriously bad converters. So that's what we're talking about. And it doesn't matter, because if you do what I'm explaining, it'll be fine. So you basically take your gate, you create just the front of it. Check this out. So this is what it sounds like. This is the snare, both of them, the trigger track and the other one. So now listen, this is just the trigger track. This is what you're familiar with if you've ever heard a sample before. Like that's what trigger has on it, just a bunch of different stuff. you know, brass top, Tama Bell brass top, just tons of stuff. The bottom overhead room A. So this is your typical sample. Nothing special going on here. The other snare track sounds like this. Lot of length, but I'm gating it like crazy, so that length is artificial. So listen to the two, okay, together. So you'll notice, to me, when I heard the sample, I was like, this sounds good, because what I'm looking for is just that kind of like a lot of high end on the snare, not a lot of body. The real track of Snare has a lot of body, and the way I'm creating that, I'll go through what's on this. We've got the snare with this gate on it. Now watch what's happening here. It's just the front of it. See, without it, I'm gonna turn it off. Listen to how much cymbals are on here. Hear the difference when I turn it on now? It's just the cymbals disappear, which is what you want. Now, check it out. The other stuff, channel strip 2. So I'm just going to kind of turn these things on and off just so you can hear. The magic happens with the SPL Transient Designer. That's, to me, that's the big moment of like, that's what we need. So with and without this, no huge difference. Watch. This is with it, and this is without it. With it, I'm just barely tapping the compression, a little bit of EQ. Okay, now the Transient Designer, ready? This is with it, this is without it. So without it, it loses all its body. The body is happening here. See, now listen with it. Now without it. So the reason this works is because we have the sustain cranked all the way up. It doesn't go any higher. The attack as fast as it can possibly go. Now, when you combine this with a transient, this SPL specifically has a cool sound, and I use this to make drums that are kind of whack sound not whack. So, you know, when they're recorded, see, the problem with snare mics, right? If you put the snare mic where it's too far from the snare, you're going to get a lot of cymbals in it. If you point it like just randomly, if you're not thinking ahead of time, the null position of this mic needs to be either facing the cymbal, and that it's tough to, you got to kind of figure out what's the best move. Better to have the null position where the hi-hat is, or better to have the null position where the crash cymbal is. Depends on how the drummer plays, depends on where his cymbals are. That's what I mean. There's no like quick fix on like, this is how you do drums always and it'll be great. Depending on what's going on, you may have to manipulate stuff. And at the time when this was recorded, there was very little knowledge happening. So it was mostly just throw up a mic, and this is what happens. And then when you have to deal with it, you wind up doing tricks like this. And since Tom Lord Alge mixes stuff all the time from so many different people, not just the top guys, every once in a while he's got to mess around with ways to make stuff good. And this is a concept I learned from him. You crank sustain all the way, attack as fast as possible, and you use a plugin like that, and then as soon as you take that off, you lose everything. But now the rest of the stuff is mostly flavor and color. Now listen to the UA 176. This is doing a lot. Check this out. That's without it now. Now, what am I doing on this? I'm slamming the input all the way. All the way. That's how much. And then the output, I'm just making it so so the gain stage coming out of the plugin wasn't crazy. But when you add this, it brings this thing to life. It's on 2-to-1 ratio. Now, there's no magic with this particular compressor. You could use anything that's 1176 or anything like that. But the point is, I'm trying to bring the snare back to life. Some people would use a plugin maybe like Bloom or something. Like once you've destroyed it sort of by gating it, and then you're beefing it up with the Transient Designer, you got to sort of bring it back to life a little. So I'm using something like that, and I'm slamming it. After that is a Fairchild. So like this is the one that I don't remember which one this is, honestly. It could be the one that comes stock. Now here we go. This is without it. This is with it. Just very little color. Now listen to the lexicon. Another lexicon plug-in 480L. Without it, dead and dry. So you want length out of your snare, because length out of the snare means more power out of the snare, especially in a song like this where there's distorted guitars. If you don't do stuff like that, you'll never hear the snare. If it'll sound like plip 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 plip. Instead it goes blah blah. I mean, like, depending on what you're going for, you need that thing to carry through the distortion, through the dense mix. So length helps. So you add a little Lexicon 480L, the fat plate preset, I mean, or something. That's probably, I just barely probably tweaked this thing, and that's it. And with and without it, the difference is huge. This is without it. With it. Now together. So that, works out. When you put them together, they sound like this. There was no rack or floor. So I needed to basically, first of all, I needed to get control of the cymbals, which is the reason I did so much gating and stuff to the snare, created that trigger track, just to be able to get control of the snare without cymbals everywhere, because the bleed from the cymbals into that mic was destroying the overhead sound. Together, everything just sounded like cymbal mush. Like way too much cymbals. Whereas now I was able to get control of the snare. So now I've got a powerful present snare. And then I can mix in as much left and right overhead as I want for cymbals. But me personally, I don't even love to hear a white noise generator like cymbals so much. So to me, the cymbals always err on the side of a little lower is better. Because then you get to hear things like the snare fill he did before the bridge, during the bridge thing where he's I mean, you get to hear that instead of just cymbal crashing. So the rack and floor are their own basically creation. All I did was duplicate the overheads, and out of duplicating the overheads, the couple times he played, that's why it's mostly muted. The couple times he played some toms, I basically pulled those from the overhead tracks, and then only thing that you see is the hits. Like, that's it. Wherever there was a spot, and it's rare, man. But in this specific song, it's rare. In another song I did, it was a little more obvious. But in this one, he may have never even played it. Now that I'm looking at it, oh, here's one. Here's a freaking tom. It's like you have to go through and find it. So I would listen through the track, hear, okay, there's a tom, and then I'd go, find where it is, and then put it on this own track for floor, and then I put the trigger on it, and this creates a better tom sound than one covered in cymbals, because the toms were not spot mic'd. So you have to figure something out. And in this case, I don't have a track of just tom. But if I did, I could do another trigger track for the toms. You could do that, just like we did with the snare. But it works out. Listen. Powerful tom coming from the rights. I mean, what else do you need? Sometimes you slip away. Sometimes you slip away. Love that. It's that Gap Band, Dave Grohl, Nirvana fill that he stole from the Gap Band. You know, where it just I love that stuff. So anyway, this is where we're at. This is where we're at, all right? So you could do a lot with a little, you know, on what do I got going on the overheads? If you're curious, overhead left and right, I've got barely any compression, little tiny bit on the overhead left. Let's listen to that real quick. Overhead left and right, this is what these sound like. You really... Look at what I'm rolling off. A ton of low end, 163 hertz and up on the high pass filter. So what I'm saying is, I didn't need it because I got it on the kick. Because I did the same thing that I described with the snare on the kick. So check it out. On the kick, I've got my trigger track, all right? Everyone knows what a sample sounds like on the kick. Now, listen to the real kick with it. It gives it, listen without it. Sounds fake. Sounds just like what a kick sample sounds like. And then with this, that like this little just realness to it. Now, but the realness is created a little different on kick, but you know, in a similar way where look at how tight this is on my gate. Listen to this. The threshold on the gate. Because without it, listen to how much cymbals there is. Sounds like a hip hop track. So with it, now again, look at the cue right over here, Dear Humanity M4L. You know that's where the kick trigger track is sending to. See that on the kick trigger track right here, 4L sending over here to the key input on the gate, and the threshold's so tight it's just giving you that little bit. And then, you know, I got some 4KB on it. Without it. With it. If you notice, I'm cranking 15 dB of 5.5K. Again, same 176, just like on the snare. Listen, with and without it. This is without. This is with. Just tightens it up and makes it pokey instead of muffled. Listen. It sounds like there's a cover over it, and then you put this on, it takes the cover off. Again, I'm just cranking the input, and here I'm also cranking the output. I've got the attack. Everything's cranking. This might as well be called the cranks. This one right here. It's just super crank. All right. And relatively fast release. Now, the Devil Lock is also on here, saving the day. So check it out. This is with the Devil Lock. This is without it. With the Devil Lock now. Devil Lock's a great way to fatten a sound up in a way. It just sort of smushes it, and then you can bring it up in the mix enough because it widens it out when you saturate it. It's really what's going on. I mean, it's Sound Toys is some of my favorite plugins. So with it, without it. Now without it, it sounds smaller by a lot. Now, it's like this gives me that house shattering thump. It's a house rumbler, you know. So let's listen to the two together real quick. See, the rumble from the house rumble is coming from this real kick track. Now, when you put the two together, you put the whole drum set together. I mean, it sounds like this. Now, could the cymbals come up a little bit? Yeah, sure, they could. If you were a guy who liked cymbals, bring them up as much as you want. I personally don't like them. I just don't like, I mean, it's one thing if they're good cymbals and everything's great. At this time, you know, this is probably budget ZBT, you know, Sabians or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever the, I don't know, the cheap line of cymbals is, like the starter pack or whatever, like something like that is what it sounds like to me here. So my goal for the cymbals was literally just to brighten them up. That's why I'm cranking a lot at 11K, giving them air. The rest, it's all pretty much flat, touch of compression, you know. And same thing here with. So that was that one. It's just, I mean, it's going to be the same thing pretty much. I'm curious how close. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, same thing. Yep, just like, see how it's I like to live. Notice I do that a lot. Like, look, see the 1-1. Instead of just nothing, I'll crank it just a little, and then this light might flicker here and there. I don't know what it is, but it sounds a bit different when you do that. Also, I'm jamming the fast attack and the peak. You know, got the stuff cranked up here. But that's channel strip 2, and typically I'll use 4KB, but I found it was a little dark. So I switched to the channel strip 2 because it was a little brighter. It's like emulates the 9000, you know, SSL 9000. Again, 480L, 480L, because with it and without it, this is with it, this is without. This room was particularly dead. Now, keep in mind, just don't compress the cymbals like crazy, because then they will just whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Tons of whoosh, just freaking never-ending whoosh. So I try not to compress the cymbals a whole lot if I can. Now, you may ask, where's the drum bus? Where's the crush bus? Where's the whatever? It don't exist, man. What I am doing is sending it all to a VCA fader, okay, to be able to control the levels of everything. But bus 1314 is where they're all being sent, and guess where that is? Bus 1314... Brower Eyes style. If you watched my video on Brower Eyes, which I made, check that out. It basically explains what he does, what I do, and what he does, you know, I got this from him, is A, B, C, and D, and B is where all the drums get sent. That's why I bus 13 and 14, and on that, this is, so I wouldn't call it a, you know, a crush bus or anything, because all the drums processed how they are on their individual tracks, like I just showed you, all of them get sent here, and there's not like another bus in parallel with it that's crushed and then one not. In this case, they're all getting sent here to a distressor. But what you'll notice is this, and this is also something I stole from Brower Eyes. That's what I mean by I say it's a combination of like Michael Brower and Tom Lord-Alge's style in a way. Michael Brower doesn't hit his compression super hard most of the time. I mean, obviously there's exceptions for everything, but he spends a lot of time, if you watch his explanation of Brower Eyes, in, you know, figuring out exactly how much gain reduction should be happening on each of his ABCD, and it's generally on the lower side. So even though you might have distortion settings on and different things in order to, you know, make the compressor sound a certain way, he's not hitting this thing so it's 20 dB of gain reduction or anything. He's keeping it judicious, little bit here and there, because you want the drums to still sound alive. And as soon as you crush this, it's no different than putting compression like crazy on the cymbals. I mean, it's going to bring the cymbals to a whoosh whoosh. And if you want a little dynamic range in there, you're going to have to do very little. So that's why just kissing it, you know? It's just putting stuff together. Also, keep in mind, the bass gets sent here too. Just as a rule of thumb, bass is getting here. The rest, this was just other things I tried, and I like the distressor the best. And also, I have a little of this on here. This is the UAD Precision Bus Comp. It's just kind of keep holding everything together. Now without it, it sounds bigger, but I just felt like it was too big. So it gets louder than the guitars, louder than everything when you take this off. So what I wanted to do was get a little color from this by putting it on and make sure everything kind of worked in there, as opposed to just, you know, lowering the output or something on the distressor. Sometimes I'll do this because every little thing you add has color. I heard Mark Daniel Nelson say that once. He's like, some plugins you just put on and they're doing something without even touching a knob. Everything's zeroed out. You hear a little bit of a change in the sound. So sometimes you just add something and get a little something and you do hardly anything. And that's just part of it. And then sometimes you crush things by cranking the input to all the way, like I also showed you. So there's literally both sides of the spectrum on what you can do. The way I look at it, I used to always want the kick to be the absolute loudest thing in the mix. I realized later, you know, see, that's the thing. The longer you do this kind of thing, the more it changes. I realized later the snare is more important than the kick. The kick's critical, but I want more snare than I want kick. And I also want the music. I want the guitars and the vocals and just, I want a lot of the music to make me feel good about the song. I don't want it to all come from the drums. The louder the drums and everything are, the less importance the guitars and the bass have. So it's a balancing act. That's why they call it mixing. It's literally the right amounts of each ingredient make a huge difference. And anytime I lean too hard on the drums, I just feel like there's less power in the song. And again, it's a taste thing. So there is no right, there is no wrong. And it's all genre dependent also, because as soon as you change genre, you know, the music's a distant thought, like just a whimsical idea that you graze against in hip hop most of the time. And the beat and the bass is everything. And if that's not shaking the room and the car, it ain't loud enough. What are you doing? Like, this place needs to shake. And when you're doing stuff like this, if you were to make the drums that loud, the whole song would have less power because the guitars drive this, the bass drives this, and the vocals drive this. The drums are also driving this, but it's just not the same thing. So hope that made sense. I don't want to get too crazy, but if you guys got any questions, throw it in the comments. I appreciate it. And, you know, any other ideas for different things you want me to go over or something, let me know. Happy to do it. We're offering a special between now and New Year's where we're doing a 25% discount on mixing and mastering. Check out the website. Also, no discount applies for lessons or consultations, but we offer lessons, consultations, anything you need help with, hit me up. Hope you dug the video. Leave a comment, hit the like button. Thanks for watching. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this. Take it easy.